Hey everyone tuning in on LinkedIn for our LinkedIn Live. This is to celebrate episode 150 of the Happier at Work podcast. And I still can't believe that I got there. Certainly when I started out, I didn't really think that far ahead that I would get to 150 episodes, but nearly 4 years in, about 3.5 years in. And I was so delighted to welcome back my guest from episode 50 and kind of sneakily episode 100 as well. What started out as a little bit of a joke of, I should be on episodes 150 and 200 as well. Bhushan Sethi, thank you so much for joining me again, and brilliant to have you on this live. Do you want to let people know a little bit about you and your background?
Yeah, first of all, congratulations on 150 podcasts, Aoife. Having done a few in the past, I know how difficult it is. And it's not just a case of turning up. You really analyze this, research these, supplement these. So congratulations to you. Yes, I'm a partner here at PwC in our strategy practice. I help companies with large-scale transformation from a strategy and operating model and a workforce angle. Been doing that for the best part of 25 years. I also do some work at places like the World Economic Forum and the T20 on kind of taking some of those skills and experiences and taking them from a policy angle. And I've also recently started teaching at a strategy class at NYU Stern part-time as well.
Oh,
delighted to be back.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing that you're doing that as well. And you're based in New York, which we've had several conversations about in the past. Someday I'll get there. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. Absolutely love that place, and I'd happily work there. I did spend a summer in Montauk in Long Island back about, I don't want to say how long ago, probably 25 years ago at this stage. But brilliant, love that place. So on the podcast itself, we talked about the world of work post-pandemic. So when we recorded episode 50, that would have been at the height of the pandemic, essentially. I think we were talking about everything that was going on and all the changes that people were making. But now, I mean, I don't want to say it's over because I know there's still some stuff going on. But for all intents and purposes, it seems like most people, the majority of people are experiencing that the pandemic is over. Do you want to talk about some of the highlights that you're seeing out there of how work is changing?
Yeah, we've traded some challenges. We traded challenges of uncertainty for vaccines for now economic uncertainty. We challenged challenges around where we had lots of cooperation at a local and a national and international level. Now we see geopolitical uncertainty and obviously terrible war in places like Ukraine and Russia. What's really good, though, Aoife, as we talked about, is there's some permanent changes. Return to work is an enduring feature of work now. It is not a debate. Many firms are basically saying, how do we get on with hybrid? Beyond the headlines that you read, the boots on the ground are really saying, how do we make hybrid work, whether that's 3-4 days? How do we get the right culture, the right routines, the right leadership models in place? And there's a hope that other pieces around mental health, around getting leaders to lean in and drive productivity, around pivoting into different business models, not just digital business models, but more green business models, and creating new businesses with exciting emerging AI like we talked about, that can be an enduring lesson learned and feature post-pandemic. That is a hope. We are going to see how that gets executed in different sectors. But as business leaders, I think it's very responsible on us to say, how do we use this as an opportunity to really rethink about work and how we best use technology and how we reinvent certain business models?
Yeah, love that. And coming back to this idea of hybrid, and like so many conversations that I've had recently have been about the hype in the media, where the media are kind of hyping up the people who are demanding the return to the office. And there's less in the media about what's actually happening out there. So it's really great to hear that reinforced, that actually it's a case of figuring out how do we make hybrid work for us. And it's, you don't have to look to the company down the road. You don't have to look to what's happening in other places, but it's really about understanding internally what's working, even on a team level, whether it's a department level, whether it's an organization level as a whole. Is about looking internally to find out what's working and asking people what's working and really listening, I think, to what's going on.
Absolutely. We're also seeing the same centralization of layoffs, and especially here in the US, where I'm closer to the data. We're at a 50-year record low unemployment. We've got the highest labor force participation that we've had in years, including, gratefully, women, caregivers, and some retirees coming back to the workforce. we've got really strong talent markets. But yes, we've got some corrections going on in sectors like tech and potentially financial services. But many people are finding work very quickly, even if they've been laid off in tech. And if you've got the right kind of skills, and if you've got kind of, you know, the ability to work, and you're flexible about where you work, it really is still a strong employee market. But you know, the headlines we see are layoffs across different sectors.
This is it. Interesting. Well, this is it. Like, is it going back to sensationalism, as you said? Is it people are they're kind of fear mongering? They're having these headlines to try and sell more newspapers or whatever it might be. Like, kind of thinking back to the old days when they used to do that. You know, it's attention grabbing, and people want to learn more. People feeling the fear a little bit about job losses and what's going to happen. But at the same time, everything I've understood about what's going on in the market at the moment is that it's very much a candidate's market, that if you do lose a job, that it's not going to be easy to find something else, but it's going to be relatively, compared to if there was a high level of unemployment.
Yeah. Well, obviously, as someone who spends time with the media, I'm obviously culpable for creating some of those sensational headlines. I also think it's incumbent on us as society and as workers to say, you know, we like the clickbait headlines. Like we are curious about what's happening with certain business leaders, certain world leaders, certain companies that are kind of under scrutiny. I think we can all step back from this to say, how do we think about reinventing our businesses? How do we use technology? How do we drive productivity? How do we increase opportunities to marginalized communities? That stuff is not sexy and doesn't necessarily sell headlines and advertising space, but that's what's happening in a lot of businesses around the world, where people are trying to figure this stuff out. Big businesses, private businesses, public businesses, small businesses. And I think that's our responsibility when we think about happiness at work and we think about our well-being. It's focusing on what you can control as a leader, or as a team leader, or as an employee, as a new entrant to the workforce, and just take it as a learning opportunity to do whatever in your control to kind of redesign that work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that really stood out for me from our conversation the last time was the shifting demographics within the workplace and the responsibility. So kind of coupled with the responsibility of organizations to have an influence or have an impact on society. So, you know, talking about things like women at work and carers leave and flexible working. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing out there and the kind of things that companies may be able to implement?
Yeah, some of my friends and colleagues have told me I've actually veered out of my lane, but I think that we need to be in many people's lanes in this area. So what I was talking about is when we think about like participation rates in the workforce, we need to get more caregivers. We need to get kind of more caregivers in the workforce. We need to think about managing population decline here in the US and in many developed economies. How do we do that? Is we make childcare more affordable, and we make the prospect of having children, you know, an easier one if you're entering the workplace, especially during the first few years of childcare, when it's so important for children. And so, you know, and we're seeing some of this in the US through the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act, President Biden's actually said, for those companies that get government funding for the building of semiconductors in the US, those companies, that funding is dependent on providing access to childcare. So that is normal in Europe, as you know. That is rare in the US. So it was just an idea that many others have spoken about candidly, to say, how do we think differently, and childcare and family formation and making it easier, especially because the cost of having children and raising children today is astronomical for a number of people, especially with still persistent high inflation and high interest rates.
Yeah, and equally, you know, I don't know what it's like in the States, but I know certainly again, the headlines in the UK and Ireland, and personal experience through my brother as well, and childcare rates in Ireland just absolutely astronomical. And someone who doesn't have kids, but I can see the benefit of why we need more children in society. We need to kind of, I was about to say repopulate the earth. That's not what I mean, but we need to maintain it, or, you know, I'm getting caught on my words here now. But I can see the importance as someone who doesn't have children. I can still see why it's important to support that, especially in the workplace. And I think the workplace can have such a profound impact on people's ability to be able to do that. And I know a lot of women leave the workforce because of the lack of flexibility, because of there's such a high cost of childcare, because it's, you know, is it worth my while to work and then to put all of that money into someone looking after my children when I could not work, look after my children at home, and, you know, not have to necessarily pay the childcare. So it's kind of it's a tricky situation, a tricky balancing act. But I do think that companies can have that impact at a societal level as well, and the importance, I suppose, of flagging that as something that's important, generally speaking.
Yeah, and a very important part of living your purpose, building trust in society. There's nothing more purposeful than trying to do what's right for your community, and the community really consists of everyone, including kind of, you know, young children trying to get school, trying to get good nutrition, and trying to get good healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's even thinking further down the line, it's those people who are going to be working, who are going to be contributing when you and I are kind of in our older age. So yeah, kind of go.
Yes, we're never aging, but yes,
right out of both of our lanes now. But any kind of other thoughts in relation to the podcast? And I did forget to say at the start, for anyone who is watching this live or for anyone who's watching the replay, there is a link to the full podcast episode, where you can get it wherever you listen to podcasts. It's episode 150 of the Happier at Work podcast. But I would love if anyone wants to leave a comment, if you have a question, any kind of final thoughts from you, Bhushan.
Yeah, so we really thought about it as kind of the next generation of, you know, how we think about the future of work. And many firms are in their own form of transformation or reinvention of their business model, fueled by technology, trying to drive efficiencies and productivity. And we started talking about the role of leadership. And we really discussed that in addition to all the really important human skills and inclusive leadership and coaching, we also talked about it's incumbent on leaders to really lean in and redesign that work. Work has to be different now. Work can be synchronous when it all needs to be done together, but it can be asynchronous, and we can use technology, whether that's emerging tech like AI, or whether it's bots, or whether it's accelerating the cloud journey. And leaders have to be digitally savvy and courageous enough to engage their people to say, how do we redesign work so it's better? Whether that's simplified, whether that's kind of more productive, whether we're actually baking in rest and recovery into work. It's not just about running faster on the treadmill. It's actually thinking about quality of outcomes. And so there's a moment now that we have to actually reinvent work, which again, lots of people, Professor Linda Grattan's written a whole book on this. But there's kind of lots of thoughts about that. But that's my one hope as a business practitioner working with clients, that we can be part of that journey in the right, responsible, purposeful way going forward.
Yeah, that, I suppose, looking at it as an opportunity to redefine how we work. I love how you explained that, especially say from the productivity perspective, where the focus a lot of the time tends to be how do we get more done in less time. But now it's thinking about, well, what is the work that actually needs to get done? How do we take time out of that, reflect on what we do? How do we develop, and how do we rest from that so that we perform at our peak the next time it comes to like an intense period? And I had an interesting conversation. I won't kind of go into it now, but it was kind of touching on these concepts of what does that actually mean, and what does that look like, and how do we have the opportunity now to redefine what work actually is. So I think people are starting to have those conversations at a senior level, and I'd be interested to see what the end result is. Probably without media sensational headlines, I might add, because I don't think it's not going to be too much clickbaity, but definitely interested to see what the outcome of that is.
And then Aoife, I guess one other final point I would just add is, I know you have a diverse range of listeners, from HR leaders to business leaders to people entering the workforce. Like, my advice to everyone now is, you know, and again, from the privilege of having done this for, you know, the best part of 25 years, is the more that we can kind of stay positive and lean into whether it's redesigning work, how do we think about technology, if you have to make difficult decisions around layoffs, how you do it with dignity and humanity and kind of support people through that transition, the more we can actually stay positive and not lose our heads and not be divisive and not be negative. That's really important right now for everybody's mental well-being, for kind of society, for the impact we have on our families, because it's really easy with sensational headlines and with kind of social media and everything else we see around us for us to lose their heads and focus on things we can't control. And I would encourage everyone, including us, to remember that in times of turbulence and uncertainty, which we're obviously going to have some in the next few months.
This is it. If there's two things that I could take away from what you just said, it's about, first of all, it's about being more human at work. And then secondly, from another recent conversation I had on the podcast, which hasn't actually been released yet, is this idea of taking work seriously, but not taking ourselves so seriously. So kind of separating ourselves from work and our identity of ourselves from the work that we do, but not taking it all so seriously. So having a bit more fun, or trying to stay positive, or allowing the emotions, all of those kind of things I think are super important.
I love that. I look forward to listening to that episode and also bringing the humor back to work, which is probably a bit of a lost art for some of us as well.
Yeah, trying to do it. Have more fun. Brilliant. So anyone who is watching this live, this is not the full podcast episode, but there is a link to the full podcast episode below. Bhushan, I'd love to thank you for your time today, and again for being on the podcast for the third time. You kind of sneaky way into the second one, but for the third time. So really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts on this.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.